Hey guys, what is going on? It is Brooke, or the Undead DM, and in this episode of Fabula Review, I'm going to be going over the Darkblade class. It's personally, I think, one of the best ones in terms of flavor. So, without further ado, let's just get right into it. So, Darkblade is kind of what you would think of whenever you're playing the Paladin style class. Despite its name, it's not solely those who have broken their oath. It's closer to the Paladin class than what you can believe. Though it's different than what the 5e version of Paladin lets you think it's going to be. It is a little bit different. But we will get into that. So, we're going to first go over everything in the core book, and then we're going to be going over everything in the playtest that has been altered, if you so wish to use them. But your permanent increase to hit points by 5, that's your benefit, and then you also gain the ability to equip martial melee weapons and martial armor. So I believe this is the first class that has allowed you to do so, and this is a good time to say that if your class allows you to equip martial, I don't believe there's any downside to not doing that, but I think there's a rule somewhere that we'll go over in another video that you can't equip martial weapons or armor at all if you don't have a class for it. So there actually is incentive to take classes that grant you these if you want them. So firstly, we have Agony. So after you deal damage to one or more creatures, if you have a bond towards at least one of those creatures, you recover skill level ×2, hit points, and mind points. Now, bonds are something that you can create, and I'll go more in depth in another video, but bonds are things that the player as well as enemies can create towards locations, objects, people, etc. And so this is usually you can only create bonds during a resting period, which by itself, looking at Agony, you would think, wow, this is kind of useless, because Brooke, the way you described it, since you can only create bonds during a rest scene, how are you going to create a bond towards an enemy during a rest scene and be able to use it the next time? Because most likely you're going to be entering combat with the enemy, so you can't create a bond. But we will get into that, do not worry. So at a minimum, you're going to be getting 2 hit points and 2 mind points back, but at maximum you're going to be getting 10 hit points and 10 mind points. Then you got your next skill, Darkblade, where as long as you are in Crisis, which is, remember, half HP or less, you have resistance to dark damage and poison damage. Pretty good. Poison damage doesn't really come up that much. Dark damage, if you're playing in a campaign where dark damage is very common, it is very useful. This is where that whole issue with bonds comes in. The Heart of Darkness skill. Once per scene, when you enter Crisis, so the first time during a conflict, if you go to half HP or less, you can choose one creature that you can see in the scene that you don't have a bond towards, and you can create a bond of hatred. So this works well, and it's pretty much the only way you're going to be getting to use Agony, unless your character has a specific bond of hatred or mistrust or whatever towards a main antagonist of the game that your GM introduced early on, and so your character during a rest period was allowed to make a bond of mistrust or hatred towards them, so they could be used later on in the game. But in terms of in combat, Heart of Darkness is the way you should be using it. Painful lesson. After another creature causes you to lose hit points with an attack, spell, or other method, you may immediately perform the study action on that creature for free, and you gain a bonus to the check equal to your skill level, and you can only study the same aspect of a creature once. And so what this is telling you, like the ideal thing so far, is if you had one skill point in each of these 4 skills, you are above your crisis, and then you get dealt damage to put you into crisis. You make a bond of hatred towards them, and then you now gain resistance to any dark or poison damage they may have, and then you could take the study action to learn their HP, their MP, their spells, their attacks, depending on how high you roll. And then on your next turn, when it comes up, you can attack them, and then you can regain hit points and mind points because you now have a bond of hatred towards them. It's very self-contained and synergizes very well with itself. And with a max of a +3 to your skill check, since a study action is insight, I believe, then if you have like a pretty high insight, like a D8 or a D10, then you're essentially getting a +3 to a possible 14 on the die, like 14, like 13 to 14. It's not bad. It's a pretty good skill, actually. And remember, you can only study the same aspect of a creature once, but you can do this on multiple creatures. So if you're put into crisis, and you make a bond towards a creature, and then you attack them to gain back your HP, the next time you take damage from a different creature, you can study them too. So if there's 4 creatures in the combat, and they all damage you somehow, then you can take a study action against all of them whenever they hit you. It's pretty good. And now we get to the equivalent of the Divine Smite skill, Shadow Strike. So, as an action, you can perform a Shadow Strike. So, note, this does use your action. It's not free, it uses your action for the turn. So, it's more closely related to the Divine Smite spell of the 2024 version, but unlike the 2024 version, it's not garbage. So whenever you use an action to perform a Shadow Strike, you roll your Might die. And so if you have a D8, D10, D12, you roll that, and whatever number comes up, you lose that amount of hit points. So if you roll a D10 and you roll a 10, you lose 10 HP. And if this doesn't reduce you to 0, you can perform a free attack. And so, whenever you make this free attack, you still roll your accuracy and everything. And if it hits 1 or more targets, this is important, if it hits 1 or more targets, meaning if you take something like Weapon Master, you can use Blade Storm to have it hit up to 3 creatures if your character already has multi-2. Not only does the attack deal the attack's normal damage, so assuming that your weapon is like HR plus 10, assuming you're using a bigger weapon, if it's HR plus 10, that means that you're dealing HR plus 10, but it also deals an additional damage equal to your skill level in Shadow Strike, plus the number rolled on your Might die. So back to the example of rolling a 10, if you have 1 skill point in this, you deal 11 extra damage on your HR plus 10 weapon to all 3 creatures if you use if you use some kind of multi-attack. And if at max skill level, if you roll the highest you can get a possible 15 to 17 if you roll max on your die, depending on if you have a d10 or d12. There is one caveat though. It is that all damage dealt by your Shadow Strike becomes dark and it cannot change. Meaning that if you have something like Elemental Weapon that changes your damage to a particular damage type, Shadow Strike overrides that and makes it dark. There's nothing you can do about it. Now, much like how I said with the Chimerist video, this can definitely be changed to a different damage type, so if you don't particularly like the flavor of dark, like how one of my players did, we easily just changed it to light. It's not a big deal. You can definitely get the paladin flavor here, you're just not going to get the support aspect from it itself, which we will go over in just a second, but we're going to go over the playtests here. So, Darkblade free benefits got changed to where now you gain martial armor, so remember you gain martial armor by default, but you also get the option of either getting martial melee or martial ranged, because remember you only got martial melee before. But Shadow Strike, if you noticed, just says you make an attack with a weapon you have equipped. It doesn't say melee. And so the reasoning that they changed it is because Shadow Strike never required melee weapons specifically. And since there are ranged weapons that use might, because they're two-handed weapons, you can theoretically use Shadow Strike at range. So they just added that little distinction so you don't have to take another class like Sharpshooter in order to get this benefit. It's a lot better. They also changed Agony a bit to where it's once per turn, including other creatures' turns, after you deal damage to one or more enemies. This is because if we read back on the skill, it says, after you deal damage to one or more creatures, if you have a bond towards at least one of those creatures, you recover the hit points. The problem with this, as stated in the playtest, is that you could gain double or triple the amount of HP and MP regen, because two-weapon fighting, it lowers your damage, but it gives you an extra attack. So if you just attack the same creature twice, you could get, at maximum, plus 20 HP and plus 20 MP for attacking them. And with the triple/heroic from High Fantasy, you could attack the same creature 3 times, getting a maximum of 30 HP and 30 MP for a single action. And nothing else in the game besides like Tinker potions and like maybe a psychic gift from Esper if they have their brainwave clock maxed out, give as much in that regard. Ace of Cards does it too, but Ace of Cards is kind of like a joke class. It's made to be overpowered, but we'll go over that later. So they basically just changed it so it only applies once per turn, including other creatures' turns. This is so that they added that little text saying including other creatures' turns, so that if you get the ability to like retaliate using Counter-Strike from Weapon Master, where you can make an attack against a creature when it's not your turn, then it makes it a lot easier. It really limits the amount of HP and MP you're able to regain in a short time. And so it's not just an infinite HP and MP farm that you can really get into. Now, like I said, this is the kind of the Paladin class, but you're not getting a lot of the support aspects of the Paladin that people may be used to. And so there are a couple options. You could go the way that one of my players is going, where they are a Darkblade Esper, and they're reflavoring their psychic gifts as like divine blessings. And so they have a lot of the support options. You can also take Spiritualist if you want more healing abilities. Or if you want to go full into like the Revenant style of Vengeance Warrior, you could go Darkblade, you could go into maybe like Weapon Master, and then you could go into, I think Fury allows you to do it. Yeah, if you have like dagger weapons, but yeah, if you go into like Darkblade, you go into Weapon Master, and then you go into something like, oh, I don't know. You could probably go into other damage classes. You could probably go into like Commander if you wanted to. So this way you could be like a general. That's not a bad combo. If you wanted more MP and HP regen, you could go Symbolist and have like your divine holy symbol and place it on yourself to gain more MP and more HP with like things like personal touch and stuff. You could there's a lot of different ways you can go about this. Like you can either go with the angry swordsman, the paladin of justice, the defiant revenant. There's a lot of ways you can go about this, and you could even go with some like weird things like a sort of Eldritch Knight fighter, where you take Darkblade and some spellcasters that enhance your attacks. So you could go something like the Elementalist. You can go into the Entropist if you want some kind of time magic, so you could be kind of like Rimuru from reincarnated as a slime. There's a lot of things you could do here. Overall, I think it's a pretty good class. It's definitely one of the ones that I like the best out of the core book. The other one we will get into a little bit later, but this is definitely one of the more fun classes to theorize builds about. There's even a really funny one that you could go with Darkblade that people like to call the Angry Librarian, where you go Darkblade, and because Darkblade has the ability to do a study action with Painful Lesson, the Lore Master has the feature that we'll go into another video, but in a brief summary, it gives you a bonus to study actions. And since this study action is for free, you can essentially get hit, take damage, take the study action, and then gain the bonus from Lore Master, thus the Angry Librarian, because, I mean, look at him, he's clearly a librarian. I think it's a funny build, but yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites to look at. But yeah, we'll see you in the next one.